this one.
different set.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yes, that's so funny. That's just and you know what stresses me out because I don't enjoy doing it is I don't like to write. With all the Mercury in my chart, with all the Mercury in my chart, writing is my least favorite thing to do. So of course I've signed up to do a book.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
Yeah. So we'll see how it all it's all gonna go just fine, but it's always interesting to see.
Yes, indeed.
All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Eat and Greet, where hopefully in the next hour, we're going to give you something that is worth the time you took to show up. And I definitely think that we will, because Melanie Reinhart's here, and it's going to be great. I mean, I just feel like you don't even, in my mind, need an introduction because I'm like, well, she's just fabulous, so we can just go with that. That's your whole bio. Is
Melanie Reinhart. Great. Well, I have to say, I think you're fabulous because we just, when we spoke last, just drop into a conversation so nicely. It's wonderful.
Yes, so it's kind of nice, huh? Yeah, it's fun when you do meet those people and you fall right into conversation as if you just haven't stopped having one.
Yeah, exactly. And always sort of pick up where you left off.
Yes, that's good, like spirit food, I think, when we meet people like that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, guys. So, little housekeeping. The Astrology YouTube Academy does start on Monday, and we have our preview video out with S.J. Anderson already in the Kickstarter playlist, where you can check out the natal chart of our academy and see how we chose the election. So feel free to feast your eyes on that. And we will be starting out first thing on Monday at 11 a.m. MDT with what astrology is, what it isn't, how to gather your chart. And then we will jump into the astronomy and the history with Chris Brennan, Gemini Brett, and Naomi Bennett, taking us through our first month of lessons. As well, later today, you'll get to meet our teaching assistants and our translators. So we've got a lot going on in the next couple days. But for now, we're going to settle in for a little eat and greet time together. I've got my tea. I'm ready to just breathe in all of Melanie. And we're going to talk about Aquarius and what an interesting energy it has been for some time now.
Yeah. Indeed. Wow.
Yeah, we were laughing and saying time is out of shape.
Yeah, all bent out of shape, right? Yeah, we started that conversation immediately. We logged on just before coming live, So maybe I'll just pick up that thread from there.
I think so. But before we do jump in there, for anyone who hasn't met you or hasn't gotten to hear about your space and your place in astrology, will you tell us a little bit about how you got started in astrology?
Oh, sure. So, okay, the year was 1959. That's so weird. And I turned 10 years old in that year. And I had an accident at home and fell and broke my arm quite badly. So I had a lot of time off school. And because it required bone setting and surgery and all that kind of thing. So I had a lot of time off school. And the National Library was pretty much at the end of the street where I lived. So I used to walk down there and spend my days in the library instead of going to school, which I liked. Now, just to say, I was born in Rhodesia as it was, and Rhodesia became Zimbabwe in 1980. So the National Library of Rhodesia had one shelf about yay wide. You can just see my hands there, a bit more than that, maybe a meter, one shelf, called Philosophy, Psychology, and Religion. This because it was basically an agrarian economy. So there were, mountains and rows of shelves on things like, tractor maintenance and stuff like that. But there was one little shelf. And on there was really a pretty good selection. So some of the complete works of Freud, complete works of Jung, some of wouldn't fit on the shelf to have the whole thing. But then lots of things like First Principles of Theosophy, that's an actual title, you can still get it. And the Bhagavad Gita and other sacred texts. Just, like one little item. And one small book on astrology. And one of my deep regrets is I don't remember what the title was or the author. I would love to know. But anyway, I still remember this moment very well. I took this little book off the shelf and I had a big plaster cast on, sort of like a body cast with, because of the broken arm thing. And I remember propping it on my left arm and opening it and leafing through
what you're given.
Pages, and starting to feel really indignant because somehow I just knew there was way more to astrology than what was written in this little book. It was basically a brief description of each one of the sun signs. And I remember borrowing it and then, going back and having it stamped out again and taking it out again. There was nothing else on astrology anywhere, and there was no bookshop which carried any title of anything esoteric. Also, at that time, there were sanctions because of all the politics and so forth. So it wasn't possible. Even if I had known what to order, I couldn't have ordered anything in overseas because there was an import-export ban going on. So all I had was this little book. So I memorized all of the periods of the year for the different sun signs and the little descriptions. And then I just always asked everybody I met when their birthday was to try to put some felt experience onto what I was reading to see how come they were saying what they were saying, is it real? Does it tally? And so on. And I went on like that for years and years, perhaps being a sun in Gemini, a naturally curious type, And so I can truly say that astrology has accompanied me in my life as a central thread since the age of 10. So the next step on that journey was I was given this book. This is the very book was given to me for my 19th birthday by a friend. This is the actual book, which I had the foresight to cover carefully because it's been out of print for ages. But you can read it for free on the website called chaldea.com, Khaldea. You'll also find rich treasure of early Rudyard stuff. Not only early, but there's a lot. Anyway, that to me, it's still one of my most precious astrology books. I love it. It is a book about the sun signs, but the way they are described, for me, it was just like an epiphany because I'd already for years, let me see, 10, for 8 years already, I'd been immersed in my own little exploration about the sun signs. And then suddenly, wow, it was like I felt I was at the feet of the master because just the way he describes it is so profound. Just a total shift of level when you read Rudyard.
Yeah.
Specifically, what he really brought in was an emphasis on the cyclic nature of everything that we study in astrology. So you won't find bits of information in Rudyard. Everything is connected in this grand sweep of all these cosmic cycles in which we participate like every minute of our life. And so the vision level behind that is so crystal clear and so profound. And I still periodically reread it, Amazing. Anyway, so that was the big aha. And I knew in that moment, it was like I made a commitment to really follow this thread, which I did and I'm still doing. And that urge to follow that thread eventually was one of the things that prompted me to leave Africa and come to London. And I eventually discovered the Faculty of Astrological Studies, and I trained with them. But perhaps doing everything backwards, Mercury retrograde in my chart, right? So do everything backwards. So by the time I got to find out about the faculty and do their course, I was already working professionally. So I don't know how I did it, but I did. I mean, I got myself from zero all the way up to being able to read charts professionally without ever having attended one class or ever had a teacher. And I'm not saying I recommend that. It was this backwards way of doing everything, you know. And then it was around my Saturn return, in fact, knowing what Saturn was about, how that configured was, I discovered the Faculty of Astrological Studies, and I knew that that's what I needed to do. I needed to really structure and formulate and consolidate all the things that I'd learned and the experience I had already gained reading charts, you know. And that was a decision I never regretted for a moment. It was also like entering a community. Cue Aquarius, right? And that all happened when Uranus by transit was passing over my ascendant, so another Aquarian cue. And then eventually, I forget the date, I think it might have been 2009. But anyway, I was completely floored when they invited me to become a patron of the faculty. And I was so kind of overwhelmed. And it was also done so quickly that I was sort of caught totally off guard. Probably if they'd contacted me, you know, a few weeks beforehand and said, well, we're thinking of this, I would have said, no, I can't possibly. But it was all in the middle of a summer school with a lot going on. And I still remember the moment I went like the proverbial rabbit in the headlights.
Yeah.
And the first thing I asked was, what do I have to do? And then it was Claire Martin, then the president, who asked me. And bizarrely, she and I were born in the same small town in Rhodesia. How's that for weird? Place nobody's ever heard of, you know? Anyway, and she said, there's no task list. And I said, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Like 5-minute conversation as we were passing from one event to another. It was so funny.
Yeah.
So I've been involved with them for a really long time too, since 1977, in fact.
That is absolutely incredible. I just always love to hear how people, I call it the Astro Island, like how we got on the island. How did you get here? Because it's not a straight line. That is not a straight line either, you know? And it just, we get here and then we start to hone these things in, it seems like. And then, of course, with some discipline, we get some freedom to really go explore this thing.
Exactly. And, you know, well, here, if I might give a little plug for a book that was published by the faculty, it's called The Journey in Astrology, or Journey Through Astrology, something like that. You'll get it on their website or Amazon, you know, usual places. So a few years back, they decided to make an anthology of exactly this theme that you've just said. So they invited 10 astrologers who'd all studied with the faculty to describe their journey in astrology and what kind of paths they took and where they led and, you know, the time frame. And it's just a lovely book. So there are 10 of us who basically wrote our stories. And that was funny because for a long time I'd been thinking, having heard so many interesting stories about how people came or were called into astrology and how different it all is and how interesting. I kept thinking, oh, somebody should do a book about this. And then lo and behold, that did happen.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I love to hear about it because it really, I think, shapes and informs different practitioners. When I watch or hear how they got in and then I watch how they practice, it's like being able to see the fullness of their story and their lived experience, even within their practice, which is kind of neat, I think.
Yes, because the other thing is, along that very long journey, I became very interested in Chiron, the minor planet Chiron, who is sometimes named as the wounded healer. And so astrology came to me as a result of this injury I had, and therefore being off school. So it's Chiron in Sagittarius, so my schooling, education, like interrupted. And being introduced to astrology during that period of illness, Yeah. And the other thing, of course, is that Chiron was, in the mythology, we're told, well, there are two versions, but the usual one is that Chiron was eventually immortalized in the constellation of Centaurus. The other one is Sagittarius, but usually it's Centaurus. And of course, Centaurus is a huge constellation, which is not really visible much in the Northern Hemisphere. I think it's above about 15 to 20 degrees north. You can't see it anymore if you're more northern than that. But in the Southern Hemisphere, it's absolutely massive. And underneath its belly is the famous Southern Cross. Now, everybody knows the Southern Cross who lives in the Southern Hemisphere.
Sure.
It really is like this reassuring guardian up there in the sky or something like that. And it too is huge. So the centaur of Centaurus sort of stands over the Southern Cross. And I can remember night after night going out to lie on the ground and just look at this Southern Cross. I didn't know then that it was the constellation of the centaur all around it, but I have vivid memories of that,
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think about my call into astrology, which is still what plays out today, is it really came through words. It came through just so much speaking. And that is still the way things translate, through patterns in different languages and words. That's the way it's a full experience for me in that.
Wow, yes.
Yeah. That was fascinating.
And just building on what you've just shared, I guess something else that's always really engaged my curiosity is how the felt experience tallies with the words.
Mm-hmm.
So that may be something about the fact I learned without a teacher and in isolation, but just by watching and thinking and feeling and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's been a major theme for me all the way along. Yeah. And I find that that's the way I learn, basically, at least learn astrology, is something doesn't become real for me until I've felt the vibes and felt the energy and seen how this works in a really embodied way. Otherwise, I find nothing sticks. It just goes straight through my mind.
Absolutely. That's my lived experience as well, is that it's
okay
that way. But I came in backwards like you.
Right.
Yeah, we came in feet first,
Yeah.
So, and that's and then got structure around it and some guidance. But certainly I think it's funny because we're like the adventurous side of that, of the exploration, where it just was what it was. And so there's a lot of intuition you do have to trust before
exactly
you meet structure in the community of people that I think could show me how to hone that. So yeah, that's my lived experience too. 1000%.
Right. That's one reason why I find you very easy to talk to.
But you're also a Gemini sun, and I have Mercury in Gemini, so we just
so we just go, and also because we both came feet first or backwards or whatever into the field,
Yes. Okay, so we do have a question from the chat really quickly before we actually talk about our topic. This has been so good already, though. So the journey through astrology, is that the name of the book that you said?
Yes, or Journey in Astrology. Let me see. I've got it here somewhere. It's through astrology, and here it is. Nice cover.
Mm,
Journey through astrology.
okay. Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, speaking of community, yeah, we did cue up the Aquarian vibes with that one, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
And we are just, my goodness, so in it. You know, I had this question about, are we in the age of Aquarius or not? Which I just, maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But when we look around and like, these are very Aquarian things. And
I know it's everywhere.
it's absolutely everywhere. And this idea of I just do it on my own, I think is really dissolving. I feel like there's so much more grouping happening, but also a responsibility again of the individual adding to the grouping. You know,
Absolutely.
yeah, is that what you're experiencing in London?
Absolutely. And just while I think about it, your mention of, well, the start of the age of Aquarius and, what that's about and so forth. I think I've also got this running to get all my books.
Yes, please do. Please do. We would love to see the whole house.
Okay, this book is out in a new edition. It's a complete must-have, and I wish that Nick Campion, genius that he is, was the author. And I wish he would also do a new edition with all of the new historical things that have churned over since he first wrote this. But it is an amazing book because it's got horoscopes of God knows how many countries.
Oh.
With his little historical write-ups. That's, for people like me who are completely ignorant, really. I mean, yeah. Incredible. If I want to find out stuff, I have to go look it up. But, Nick can really run with it. But anyway, there's a wonderful section in this book about this theme of the start of the age of Aquarius. And as it's very much theme of the day.
Yeah, theme of the day.
I thought I'd look that up. Lo and behold, there's a list of dates and years and rationales as to how come people say that, which goes over 1,000 years.
Yeah. Wow.
Which is so amazing. And, and it's all a whole list of who said it and why they said it and why they thought it was. And really, you just have to laugh because to me, like we were just saying, this is where the felt sense and the vibes from the observation really comes into its own. But also just on a more rational level, what's true is that in the last period of time, all the outer planets plus Chiron and a few other centaurs, they've all been through the sign of Aquarius. And it's like just waiting for Pluto to go in.
I know.
Which is like maybe where it's leading or some kind of full stop at the end of the sentence, therefore a new start or something. But as you say, Stormy, I 100% agree. These Aquarian themes, they're all around us. And some of it is not very pretty, let's face it. Ugh,
Absolutely.
Like one thing I often think of is, the discernment between information and knowledge and wisdom. Because as we know, Aquarius is the last of the air signs. And it's also a fixed sign. That's another theme, which I'll come back to shortly. But it's interesting to just take a quick look at the other two air signs which come before Aquarius. So Gemini is the first one and Libra is the second one. And how I would see that is that the particular way that the mind works in Gemini and the particular way that the mind works in Libra, they are almost like the building blocks which lead up to a potentially really fruitful engagement with the energies of Aquarius. And I've noticed that if one of the other air signs is missing, that's not to say anything about any individual horoscopes, because actually we've all got all of the signs in our horoscope. We may not have planets in all of those signs. In fact, we won't have planets in all of the signs. but the energy is there implicit in everybody's chart. So it's as if, okay, so what Gemini brings is a sense of eternal curiosity and wonder. It's very childlike, the Gemini kind of energy as far as the mind goes. You know, it doesn't really care so much about ideologies. In fact, it will try to kind of worm away from them quickly because it doesn't want to be pinned down. So there's the capacity to regenerate into a sense of wonder and curiosity. I always think of, you know, like a 2-year-old discovering his kitchen cupboard, right? Everything has to come out and be touched and giggled over and maybe banged on the floor or put in the mouth, you know, very experiential in the way that the knowledge really starts to form.
Yeah.
And then by the time we get round to Libra, there's quite a bit of life experience along the zodiac line, let's say. And the mind has started to appreciate things that are a bit more abstract. Like really, Gemini mind is not really very abstract. It's curious and will go anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's in Libra where the sense of geometry and principles and overriding patterns start to become really important. And it's so interesting because it's a sign obviously linked deeply with relationship.
Sure.
And that is relationship across the board. It's not only one soulmate or husband or partner or best friend or whatever. It's the whole principle of relating, bringing in themes like equality and justice and fairness. So hence the symbol is, you know, same as the symbol for the legal profession. And then, you know, by the time we get round to Aquarius, things kind of go into the meta picture, the big picture. And that can mean in terms of beliefs and philosophies, cosmologies, you know, basically anything which really broadens our mind. So staying sort of in that territory, if we think about the two rulers, Saturn and Uranus. So traditionally, Saturn was the ruler of Aquarius. Since Uranus was discovered, for some astrologers, they consider Uranus to be the co-ruler, and others just have Uranus take over completely,
Sure.
which is interesting in itself. So right there, we get this very intense dialectic between the world of form, that's Saturn, and the invisible world, which is Uranus. So Uranus was the first planet to be discovered with maths and technology, and that's basically invisible.
Yeah.
Inwardly, all the other planets are visible, even though Mercury is really hard to see, but it is theoretically still possible. So it's a huge gulf, a cliff edge, you know, between Saturn and Uranus. And it's almost as if the fixed quality of Aquarius really highlights that. And so for me, the process of awakening, that I think for me, awakening is a key word for Uranus and therefore also for Aquarius. Awakening needs to take the form of us, each one of us, understanding where we have and hold tightly onto our own fixed ideas, because fixed ideas on a collective scale, and Aquarius brings us into connection with the collective, be it at the level of thought or action or whatever. Fixed ideas on that level become ideologies.
Sure.
And we all know what happens when they get set in stone. And we're at a very interesting time collectively now, getting ready for Pluto to go into Aquarius, where we can almost see the seeds of some extremely fixed ideologies, beliefs, and therefore ways of acting. They're almost, some of them, about to get set in stone. And you can see like people are reacting all over the world.
Yes.
But the thing is, you can't get free through politics or the collective. It's an awakening internally of the human heart. And I know maybe not everybody would agree with that, but you can't legislate for awakening.
Yeah.
You can invite it and make it more likely to occur by how you live, but you can't do it to order, you know. That's very Uranian. You can't make Uranus do stuff. You know what I mean?
Think about that discovery of Uranus, which made all of the Aquarian energy, I think, make a lot of sense. You know, I think about our ancestors practicing astrology and thinking this sign and its energy are Saturnian ruled, but also then looking at Capricorn, it's like you're looking at the siblings going, it's just not possible. It's just,
Yeah.
And then Uranus shows up on the scene and you're like, no, this makes a whole bunch of sense.
Exactly.
This makes all of the sense. And it's just that individual awakening, like you said, even as much as the discovery of that energy, I think.
Yeah.
And then it pours into the collective.
Absolutely. And what just comes to mind here is, you know, there's a very ancient map of how the chakras relate to the signs of the zodiac.
Mm-hmm.
And both Saturn and also, both Capricorn and also Aquarius relate to the root chakra. So we could say that the Capricorn side of that pair outlines the kind of conservatism, and I don't mean that in a sense of a political party, but the instinct to conserve, to preserve, to protect, to defend, to keep things as they are, because that's the known and we know it works. And so if it works, why fix it, kind of thing.
Sure.
And it's very tribal, therefore, and very traditionalist and so on and so forth. And we could say in that context, so the next sign along is Aquarius, still to do with the root chakra, but then comes the awareness of the ideas which keep the former in place.
Mm-hmm.
And hence the notion of the revolution being linked with Uranus and Aquarius. It really does come from the mind and how we think, you know? And so this is what's absolutely up at the moment. And some of it's hard, like sometimes wherever Saturn is passing through doesn't necessarily give you an easy ride. It kind of takes you, you know, by the scruff of the neck, like a little kitten or something. It says, hey, look here, you got to see this, you know, wake up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the vision that, you know, that Saturnian energy creates the building, and then Aquarius stands on top and says, yeah, but can you see all of this? Look, now we can see more. And let's
absolutely.
And so, yeah, you're right. These ideas, some of them are rough where it's like, well, does that still work? Because let's really look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. We get in the helicopter and hover over our thoughts.
Absolutely. You know, one of my favorite images along that line is that, you know, the Aquarian view is like being on the top of a mountain, and there's like a town below, let's say. And so when you're on the street, posting a letter, talking with a friend, going for coffee, all these things we used to do before lockdown, right? Okay. So in the ancient past, once upon a time, that's what we used to do. But then it's kind of noisy and chaotic and things going every which way and whatever. But if you're up on a mountain, looking down on the same town, you can see the whole structure of the town planning. All the patterns start to become clear. And so one of the Aquarian fixed idea benefits is that it gives you this helicopter view that you were just talking about.
Yeah.
And then you can see the pattern. And once you can see the pattern of something, often you can either just like walk away from it, or you can tinker with it, change the pattern a little bit. Or, you could have one of these mega Uranians where you see the pattern and you just go, oh, okay, no more. Or, yes, please. It can be very fun,
Take you in two directions, thus air.
Yes, exactly.
Now, we've explored what that kind of looks like, and in that individual kind of independent awakening that has to happen, and then we pour our cups into the collective. But often we hear about it and it's like, oh, this is very exciting, we're awakening to these things, but some of it is really not nice.
Correct. It's rough.
It's
and
rough.
when that reality presents itself, and I think about this extreme difference between Saturn and Uranus in its energy and function and all the rest of it, to me, that also speaks to some of the extreme polarizations that are going on, like everywhere and about everything at the moment. And personally, see, when that situation arises, one might have a real strong calling to polarize on one side of a conflict and to fight. That happens. But it's not the only way to relate to a very sharp polarization. I'm drawing a square here with my hands, like Uranus is square Saturn at the moment. Mm-hmm. So although there's a huge pressure to take sides, all kinds of sides about all kinds of things at the moment, there's not only two ways to engage with the energy. And I've been thinking about this quite a lot. So if we think about, well, what are some of the ways that Saturn and Uranus are linked? Well, firstly, there's that chakra thing, which I mentioned. So root chakra. And that, of course, in the human being, it's like a center where the feelings of stability or lack of it are found, as is security or lack of it, trust or lack of it. All those things that in a way are being rumbled at the moment, like worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so there's something about being able to first perceive and then to build our tolerance for feelings of insecurity, instability, anxiety, shock, etc., by really being able to find our own kind of midline, mm-hmm, energetically, or our own center. And different people have different ways of doing that. But the first is to detect the feelings and not simply project them onto somebody else and then judge them and tell them that they should be doing things like how you're doing them. Right. I mean, like me, like I'm doing it, because they're very difficult feelings to bear, but it is possible. And from that place, sometimes there's like a third way of engaging with polarities. And there, I keep thinking of the fact that it is actually Chiron who links the orbits of Saturn and Uranus together physically, because Saturn actually passes right through the orbital path of Saturn, spends about 13% of its total orbit inside Saturn. And then when it's going out towards Uranus, it doesn't cross over the orbital path, but it nestles right up to the inside of it. Wow. Almost like knocking at the door or pulling on the coat sleeves or something like that. Mm-hmm. And to me, this is an image I keep coming back to. So it cuts through Saturn. Wow. So what might that be about? To me, that's something about, it starts the process of awakening, because you begin to see, oh, things aren't as I thought they were. Right. Or you get a shock or a knock or something that is a bit Uranian itself. Mm-hmm. And that can start a whole process of the known and the familiar kind of unraveling. The Saturn unravels. And then time goes weird, just as we were talking about before we went live.
Yeah.
And then, it goes all the way out to Uranus. And what's so interesting now is that on the 27th of May, coming right up, Chiron will be at its aphelion point. That simply means the furthest point in its orbit that it gets away from the sun. So it's the furthest out. And in the vernacular, the phrase far out has a lot of different meanings. It's going pretty far out at the moment. Yeah. I'm personally really curious as to how that might feel. Mm-hmm. And for me, the wondering about how might that feel is way more interesting than the question, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. When I hear that question or think that question, it takes me straight up into my head. And then I start kind of thrashing around. Well, is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? And if I just quieten down and just get into my experience, wow, that's very thrilling, because you don't really know what that's going to feel like. So I will be watching myself and my life, around end of May time, just to see. I mean, it won't necessarily be something that you can instantaneously feel. Sure. In the way that sometimes you can instantaneously feel the minute of a new moon or a full moon, but that's a really short little cycle, you see. Mm-hmm. So what we can say is already Chiron is going, it's already almost as far out as it's going to get. And it's more of a slow shift, but I still think it's feelable. And that absolutely fascinates me because, again, as we were saying, gee, we packed a lot into our few minutes before we went live, didn't we?
We sure did. That's Gemini energy at its finest.
I know. So I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, about the sun. So since the perihelion, which was on the 7th of December 1970, it was way out at that time. And any of you who are old enough to remember the late 60s and 1970s, you will know that things went pretty far out during those days. And they're out there again in the vernacular and literally physically. So if you just get a feel of the different energy dynamics. So since 1970, Chiron has been going out towards the great unknown, the infinite, or however you want to say that. And it is in the process of turning to return to come closer into the sun. Wow, what a symbol. So the sun, astrologically, well, the sun, as we know, is the center of our solar system where we live. And on Earth, we go around it. Or geocentrically, we see it pass over the arc of the sky every day. We also know that it, meaning the sun and the whole solar system, goes around the galactic center. So we've got wheels within wheels everywhere, which is so wonderful. In the human body, the sun associates via the sign of Leo with the heart. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole cluster of symbolism around that, which is about sovereignty, authenticity, and individuality in a sacred sense, not in the distorted senses, And so Chiron is now in Aries, the sign of the exaltation of the sun. And this is the sign where he turns and starts to come back in towards the sun. Yeah. Almost from the position of being an outlier or an exile or a misfit or someone who feels like they're not the same as everybody else. These are almost universal feelings, There's nothing to do with being weird or anything. But for one reason or another, almost everybody feels that, I would say. Mm-hmm. And so the coming home sense, meaning coming home to one's own internal home, one's internal feeling of connectedness with the divine, with the wholeness of the universe, that isn't entirely dependent on external circumstances, like where you live, how much money you make, and what you do as a job, and status and money, and all those kind of things. We live in the kind of a society where things are measured a lot by externals. That's a very hard habit to break. But the opportunities to do so. Sorry, I talked over you there.
Uranus and Taurus will help us break down the material.
Yes, absolutely. And yes, to bring Uranus in Taurus, I sometimes think that it's like breaking the habit of our materialistic and bull-like ways of thinking about things in order to reopen our connection with the earth and its magnificent energies on its own terms. We don't have to relate to the earth by thinking how we can make money out of it, exploit it, own it, sell it, buy it, and all of that. There's a whole matrix of energies that are the subtle body, if you like, of the earth, which we can be in touch with, even if we live in the middle of a city, And I think Uranus is really awakening that,
Sure. Well, poor Taurus is trapped in between all of this Uranian, Saturnian, Aquarian energy. It's the gang up of Aquarian, the Aquarian dance crew versus Taurus.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so Taurus is really getting a run for their little money right now and having to review and revalue, I think. But I was thinking a lot, Melanie, as you're talking about this Chiron experience, especially as it's coming back home into Leo. And as Chiron came out of retrograde, and especially spending all that time with Mars and then the Mars retrograde for such a sustained amount of time.
Yeah.
I do have that sense, and I wonder if you do too, that when Chiron came out of retrograde this last time, I felt like it was very empowered, having been retrograde with Mars for so long, to in the identity, or I almost feel like at this particular time, Chiron just looked at all of us and said, we've talked enough about who you think you'd like to be. It's time to go be that person, time to go live that. Right. Live, fight your fight, Aries energy, what are your desires? And as it's making its way back, like you said, to the heart and the governance of the sun and that sovereignty, do you feel like this is a conversation people are really in right now as to, am I really being what I think? Because it is so great to have the desire to be wonderful, but if it is not met with action, we never become the thing. We never become the next version,
Yeah, I do. And I think that for me, there's also a kind of a counterpart to that, which is if we tend more to take action first and reflect afterwards, we might mostly feel phony because we're acting off an act impulse without any connection with our own inner soul.
Sure.
And then, the reverse of that would be that we're so connected with our inner world that it becomes a substitute for action. But I think having the two together is really, at least that's what I aspire to, and I hear that a lot from people all over in all kinds of ways at the moment.
Yeah. Well,
but yes, I agree. Also, the reviewing in the Chiron in Aries and Mars in Aries, the last half of last year. Something about the wise assessment of how we engage our own Mars energy. Because there's a whole spectrum of different figures, I suppose we could call them, in the story of Chiron. So he is wounded accidentally by Hercules. So Chiron is a victim, he also became a great healer. But there's also the one who wounds.
Mm-hmm.
So the wounder. And there's a quote by Jung, which I won't try and say it because I'll mess it up. You know how quotes are always so concise and they so punchy. I'll mess it up if I try to say that. It is in my book. But it's something about the wounded wounder is the agent of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So we usually think, wounded healer. So the one who is wounded is also a healer. And that's good as far as it goes. But Jung says it's the wounded wounder who is the agent of healing.
Absolutely.
And what comes to mind there as a kind of a metaphor for the whole Chiron in Aries feeling is that more and more coming to light is the recognition of the wounding elements of war.
Mm-hmm.
Now, kind of anybody who has family that have been involved with the military, and that's really a lot of people. So that's not necessarily families who've got a vocation to be in the military as a whole calling and career. This is people who are called up, which runs in the probably hundreds of millions in the last century or two. The number of times that particularly men, but not exclusively, returned home from a war situation. Here I'm thinking about Chiron out there in Aries. You know, the Vietnam War was last time round. Time before was World War One. And now here we are again. So Chiron is like out there in Aries, the warrior, and almost like many people had their warrior energy hijacked by the state or by the powers that be, however you want to see that. And then afterwards had to come like limping home in towards the sun from the furthest dark reaches of God knows where.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a whole completely hidden level of experience, really, where people came back. Many never spoke at all about what they had experienced, what they saw, what they felt, what happened to them. Some were just almost traumatized to the point where they couldn't speak about it.
Sure.
Others wanted to, but there was nobody to talk to. And now this is all coming out. And there are many, many, many organizations here in the UK, a lot in the USA, and I'm sure in many other countries, where this is being taken very seriously. And a big campaign to raise public awareness of this. And very touchingly, many of those healing programs to work with war veterans engage with animals, especially horses. Oh, and if you want an example of that, just Google war, W-A-R, horse creek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In California, you know about it, okay?
Yeah.
And just go on their website, take a look at some of the images. Their motif is, we rescue the Mustangs and the Mustangs rescue the men. I mean, just pure bloody Chiron in Aries, you know.
Yeah.
Amazing. That's one big thing about awareness of collective woundedness. And really, if you take that back, it doesn't even bear thinking about.
Yeah.
Because we humans seem to have been carving each other up since the dawn of time.
Since, the beginning.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that, of course, is reflected in the genealogy from the Greek mythology of the succession between Uranus and then Saturn and Jupiter. Won't go into all of that now, but you can easily look it up and just note how kind of violent it all is.
Yeah.
It's like, surely there has to be a better way, you know?
So do you feel like this energy for us at this time, besides being this great excitement towards progress and moving forward, is also a bit of a time where each of us have been taken to task a little bit to figure out where we have not only been wounded, because we've been having that conversation forever, but where we have done and are continuing to do our own wounding to ourselves and others, because I do
Exactly.
have Amazon must be here.
Oh,
But does
that's
that
lovely.
seem reasonable?
Totally. It's like, well, when we need to find the wounder within ourselves, taking my cue from Jung there, to see what the wounder is up to.
Yeah.
And even if we're somebody who wouldn't dream of like hurting a fly, there could be murky, hidden ways in which we're wounding ourselves by our own self-attitude.
Yeah.
And so forth. So we can be inflicting harm that is completely invisible, because we don't do any bad stuff to anybody, but we maybe do it to ourselves. And that has to be unwound as well, you know?
Absolutely. I think that wounding is inevitable in the human experience. There's just no version of perfection that I have seen yet where someone is completely selfless or completely without victims, even if it's just themselves. And I know for me, in my experience, I've learned quite a bit about sometimes all that I'm doing to continue to create the wound is continuing to engage it instead of actually engage for healing. Like I'm engaging in a continual problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, man, we're all here to be awakened. So it is happening.
It is happening.
It is happening. And then Pluto, just not too long, will move into Aquarius, and great transformation meets great progress, but it doesn't, in the history that I've seen, come without some Plutonian energy behind that. That transition,
yes,
is a destruction before it's the rebirth.
Exactly. You know, as you were talking there, I just had an image that came in my mind, which I found rather powerful. So in this image, it's like some kind of ancient city where it's been besieged, and maybe some of the walls are broken down, and there's been a lot of suffering and so on and so forth. And then the townspeople are told that this great king is going to come and pay a visit. And so to prepare for the visit of the great king, everybody kind of gets their brooms and, you know, like those wonderful brushes made of willow strands, you know, gets their brushes, and they're sweeping the path that this great king is going to walk so they can welcome him into the town, broken though it is. And I just had that little scenario, and I thought, oh God, it's like those of us who are aware of the imminent transit of Pluto through Aquarius, it's like all these other transits through Aquarius, they've been like sweeping the walkway for him, you know. And so, you know, even if he arrives to a town where some of the walls are broken and the people are, you know, pretty discouraged because it's been a rough time, he's still the king, and he will be welcomed, you know.
Yeah. I think that's a great vision too, because I do feel like with all of the Aries identity stuff that we were working on, especially last year, it can kind of become this place where it's like, yeah, I acknowledge all the good, all of the bad, all of the challenge, all of the growth, and I'm
all of
still
it
worthy of divine love. I'm still worthy to participate in
exactly
humanity, where maybe we forgot for a time.
Yeah.
But it does take, I think, the acknowledgement of the good and the bad within me, whatever that perception happens to be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, you know, we're the reality of the world, the big picture, where that ultimately lives is so far beyond the good and the bad, the black and the white, and all of that, that really we can't afford to get stuck there in our perceptions, or else we might, you know, miss the bus, so to speak.
Miss the bus.
And so we have to attend to all of that, painful though it is.
Mm-hmm.
One can understand, you know, Aquarians sometimes have a reputation for being deniers, denying things, going into denial. Well, you can really understand why, because from that, you know, stratospheric vantage point, you sure as hell, you see everything. Yeah. And some of it ain't pretty. It's maybe at times easier to just say, I don't want to see that, don't want to know that.
Sure.
I just want everything to be like this, the citadel of light. To me, that's such an Aquarian image, the perfect town, city, world, cosmos, etc.
Yeah.
Without all this other stuff. And yet somehow finding a way of being with those opposites.
It's really critical. Really critical. And instead of being in the space, I think, especially right now, of saying, oh, all of these people on Twitter or all of those people, it becomes kind of the conversation of, well, why is that my reaction to that? Or what can I bring that is giving instead of taking from situations? Things like that. I mean, it's hard, easy to hover over the world and say, well, this sucks over here and this is really great. I think it's a much bigger challenge within each of us to say, oh, I am not doing that well, or that I still need this.
Or like, how come I get so reactive about this or that or the other? It's like, what's going on? It just occurred to me, the sign of Aquarius, you often see this in books. It's the sign of the humanitarian. Mm-hmm. And, that's good as far as it goes. But I guess to really, really be a humanitarian means you can't really other anybody. Right. Because the thing of othering, that's what we do when we get, all reactive. Mm-hmm. And, I noticed that with myself, just in ways I don't have to go very far to see that.
Yeah. Right.
In myself. Just for example, let's say there's been some kind of screw up with my bank. I've locked myself out of my account, or they've done something wrong or whatever, and I'm really angry. And as I'm hanging on the phone, I'm waiting to be put through to the person I need to speak to. I tell the story maybe 4 times before I get to, what it's like. I'm sure totally familiar. By the time I've gone through all that, I have a new word, monsterized them. In my mind. They are monsters. And therefore, I'm justified in however horrible I might be to them, just because I've been hanging on for 20 minutes and it's not my fault, it's theirs, and on it goes. So I now have a practice, I kid you not, I have a practice of every time something like that happens, where I know I run on a short fuse, and I know I'm likely to become a monster, and then I monsterize the next person who I'm on a helpline with when, like, my computer goes weird and that kind of stuff. I make a deliberate effort to notice when I'm on the verge of monsterizing them in my mind, because I've turned into a monster, and to see if I can really wind that back.
Right.
It has been amazing, because I've noticed the way my own attitude, silent, I haven't even said a word yet, but my own attitude on the phone actually is reflected immediately in the tone of the conversation, right?
Absolutely.
And I've even several times, I'm just remembering one in particular. This was a computer crash issue and a helpline I was on. And I ended up getting into this long conversation with this woman. I didn't even know her name. I didn't even know where she was located in the world. We talked for almost an hour.
Yeah.
Like we were really old friends. I learned so much. We spoke about all kinds of things, and we both ended up laughing. And I thought, wow, see what can happen if you don't monsterize people.
Right. Right. What if it is actually not all about me? That, I think, is a real, for humanity. I really do. And any of us have those situations you talk about, and it just becomes so self-centered really quickly. But it's well, what if I show up with my challenge, but I also try and make my helper's day better?
Yeah.
What if? See,
what if?
I got so much Libra, it hurts. Okay. I'm we need to relate here.
Right.
Yes, but these are incredible concepts that I think we're continuing to awaken to in the duality that humans have a duality.
Absolutely. And finding ways that are as skillful as possible to kind of maneuver oneself in this realm of duality. Like you really don't have to go very far to find a whole series of challenges about what that looks like, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was taught, and my spiritual teacher talks a lot about this with me. She's like, well, when you're disturbed, the spiritual axiom is that it's you, not them. And I'm like, what?
I know.
Right? So it's just always at home. Dang it.
Right,
Which is
exactly.
the best and the worst news, right?
Exactly right.
My goodness. This has been so wonderful. So wonderful. Thank you so much for coming over to chat.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I could go on for at least another hour or two, or maybe three. It's sort of nighttime coming, bring out the candles and oh wow.
Guess we'll have to do a nighttime like candlelight session.
Yeah.
Actually, I just think that would be divine. Now that I'm saying it out loud, I'm like, that might actually be really good. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Next time we are absolutely welcome
Next
back
time.
anytime.
And so listen, all the very best to you in the meantime, and all of your lovely viewers, and to kind of all of us kind of stumbling around in this time warp as we are.
Yes, and where time is bent out of shape right now. So if you don't really know what day it is, it's okay.
You're not alone.
Yeah, you're not alone. Just use the calendar. That is Saturn showing us its finest. Just kind of be in the vicinity of where you're supposed to be. And I think we shall all make it.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right, everybody. I will make sure that Melanie's information, books she's referenced, all of that good stuff is in the description box below this video. So thank you guys so much for showing up, and hopefully in the last hour, we gave you something that's worth the time you took to show up, and maybe things to consider, take with you this week, this year, and see how they implement into your world. So we love you guys a ton,